everyone. My name is Angie Vishianen, and I run a company called Leg Up Legal. We provide a mentoring program that connects prospective law students with lawyers so they can learn a little bit more about the legal profession before they go and dive into law school. But we started doing these Zoom meetups at the beginning of COVID-19 to allow pre-law students, current law students, and new lawyers to all interact together and start, learning from each other and really connecting with a lot of other lawyers and peers at this time, because we think community is really, really important right now. It's really easy for a lot of us to get bogged down in what's going on with this pandemic, and it's easy to feel alone and lost and overwhelmed. And so we wanted to start doing these meetups so that you guys would have an opportunity to bond with each other and connect with other people who can help you on your legal journey. So I'm excited today to introduce Gayle Gorvett, and she is an international lawyer who has practiced here in the States, but has also practiced abroad in France. And she is going to tell you all about her career, and then we'll do an open Q&A at the end. So feel free at the end if you want to turn on your videos and chime in then and ask questions. We'll also take questions in the chat box, so feel free to ask your questions in the chat in the meantime, and we'll try to get to them at the end. So Gayle, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Angie, for inviting me. And I think I just want to give kudos to Angie for everything that she does. I'm kind of amazed at all the things that you're able to put together. It's mind-boggling, to say the least. So thank you for everything that you do on behalf of myself and all of the people that you mentor, because I'm sure that you have just as much stress and difficulty going through all the pandemic issues as everyone else. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for supporting everyone in the way that you do. I'll give you just a brief introduction to me, and then I'll dive into the topic that we have for today, following your dream to an international legal career. I sort of grew up as a nomad. I don't really have a hometown. My father was an audit partner with Price Waterhouse. So we moved about, on average, every 7 years growing up throughout the United States. And I am the only person in my family who speaks anything but English. So just to dispel any notion that I grew up as, part of like a diplomatic family or anything like that, I'm a total outlier. My brother took some Spanish in school, but didn't retain any of it. My parents are kind of the same way he is. They took Spanish when they were young. And I guess my parents are also one of those couples that met very young. I think they met when they were 13 and they're still together. They're now both 80. And my father apparently cheated off my mother in Spanish class when they were in class together. He had absolutely no aptitude for it. So I'm the only one in my family who speaks any other language other than English. I started taking French very young at a private school in Virginia. We were living in Richmond at the time, and everyone else was there since kindergarten. I went to that school starting at age 12 and started taking French, and sort of really got into it and continued on with that through high school, and then ended up studying in France at one of the study abroad programs in high school, and then also studied abroad in France in college. I could only study a semester abroad because I was an economics major, so I wasn't allowed to extend it beyond that, or I wouldn't have gotten enough credits to graduate in my major. I also studied Japanese because I was very interested in working internationally, and it seemed at the time like this whole idea of the European Union was having a really hard time coming together. And so I had a professor who really encouraged me at the time when I realized, sorry, I'll take a step back. It looked to me like the European Union was really not going to come together by the time I graduated. I was graduating in 1991, and there was still a lot of difficulty. And so at that time, Japan was very, very strong economically. And so I wanted to study Japanese. My university was just starting to offer Japanese classes. So I signed up for them. And I had a very supportive professor in college who encouraged me to sign up for the JET program, Japanese Exchange and Teaching, to continue with learning Japanese. And at that time, the United States economy was terrible. We went into recession right when I graduated college, and with an economics major, there were not a lot of opportunities. Whereas, we had the possibility previously, to get jobs with places where we had interned, during college. There were no opportunities with those places. So I was either going to go to a small bank in the Midwest, and be like an office manager, or have a very, very boring job somewhere doing temping or something like that. Or I could go and live in Japan and work as a Japanese team teacher in English and learn more Japanese and have the possibility of working internationally, because I had always been interested in international work. So that's what I did right after college. But at the time, I had an economics degree and I was interested in international business. So when I came back, I went to look for jobs in finance. And I went to work in Chicago, which, because I had grown up in the Midwest, went to undergraduate in Indiana at DePauw University. All my contacts were in the Midwest. There was no social media. We didn't have the opportunity to go through LinkedIn, Facebook, to find contacts. So I did the sort of low-tech version of that. I contacted my career office and I asked for local university contacts in Chicago, and I pretended to know people that were at companies that I was interested in. I gave the name of the person who was at the career office. I said, John Smith suggested that I reach out to you. He didn't suggest anything. I just got a list of names of people who were in the Chicago area. I looked at the names of the companies that I was interested in, and then I pretended to know those people specifically, and I gave the name of the person from the career office, and I said that they suggested personally that I contacted those people. And that led—
Well, actually, I love everything about this story. I remember you telling it to me and just thinking, wow, how resourceful. Because I did the exact same thing when I was trying to, connect with professionals. I didn't really know how to go about doing it. There wasn't a LinkedIn back then, right? So I literally just called people out of a phone book cold, and and it was like overwhelming, right? I mean, it was a little bit intimidating to reach out to folks. But out of all the people you reached out to, I'm curious, what was your success rate? How many people did you get to?
I would say, gosh, it was probably about 10%.
Wow, that's actually pretty good. Mine was about 6%. So I reached out to over 50 and I only got to connect to 3. So that's pretty good odds.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you develop a pretty good story. It's definitely something that you have to keep at, and you hone your message after a while, and you get better at telling a more credible and a more convincing version of your story after you do this. I mean, it's something. I mean, I would say that the pandemic has made some things more challenging because we can't meet people in person. But on the other hand, it's broken down a lot of barriers, because now you have the opportunity to pursue things in other geographic locations, and people are much more open to that than they were even a year ago. And especially in the legal profession, where some people were very anti-technology a year ago, they've been forced to adopt Zoom. They've been forced to adopt technology, where a lot of people were very, afraid of technology, and they were very, opposed to working with someone that wasn't right next door to them.
Absolutely.
And
Well,
so,
I think it's also really great the way that you were saying that you have to hone your message,
yep.
because the more that you put yourself out there, the more that you do this, the more you refine it. And we've been hosting these meetups since the beginning of March, right? And I always have students like introduce each other, try to like introduce yourself in the chat box or introduce yourself on video. And I remember one of my mentees that first came on at the very beginning of this, she was really nervous and giving her elevator pitch. And the other day we were on another meetup with a group of lawyers that meets regularly. If you guys haven't checked out Alex Sue's meetups, you absolutely have to check out his.
Oh yeah, I know Alex. Yeah.
Alex is great, and his content is great too. He makes hilarious videos. So I saw her jump on video and introduce herself, and I was like, look, she looks so pro. That's amazing. It's really interesting to see the growth that you have. And once you start doing all this networking and reaching out to people over and over again and talking about your story, you start to find the bits and pieces that people really latch onto and relate to. And you get better and better at telling that story every time. So I really love that, the real important thing that I want people to take away from these meetups is to hear stories like Gayle's and to see like there was nothing extraordinary about us. There was no reason why we should have become, international lawyers, or why we should have become super successful lawyers, in any other way. Like, it's just you practice and you make mistakes and you try things out and you put yourself out there and you put yourself in these positions to try to test yourself to grow, right? So Gayle, I'll let you continue.
Right. So I mean, at the outset, I wasn't even supposed to be a lawyer. I had an economics degree. I studied economics, political science, and French undergrad. And then because it looked like the European Union, the idea of using French in my work wasn't really going to happen, I went to Japan to get more Japanese. And then when I came back, I went to have a job in finance. And so I went to Chicago and I worked as an investment analyst. It turns out that I was the only woman in the office. It was a very sort of misogynistic kind of macho environment. And I started quickly thinking, I'm not sure this is the path I want to take. I'm not sure this is really my passion. And I was taking finance classes at night because I had the economics background, but not the finance background of everyone else in my office. And I was really working very hard to be, a finance professional, but I wasn't sure that it was worth that intense effort that I was putting in. And I started to look at the profiles of the people who had the kinds of careers that you would have after you go to INSEAD or Thunderbird or one of those kinds of international MBA programs. And I said, wait a minute, I'm not sure those are the kinds of jobs that I want. And that's when I decided that maybe law school was a better path for me, because you can go to law school and you train yourself in an analytical way. You train yourself to be much more deep thinking, and you have skills that you can translate into a number of different professions. You can use them in the law, you can use them in politics, you can use them in lobbying, you can use them in business, you can use them in so many different ways. But I didn't have any lawyers in the family. So I went to work at a big law firm in Chicago. I went to work at Sidley & Austin as I took a huge pay cut working as a legal assistant in the antitrust department because of my economics background. And I met some amazing people there. I met Jerry Alexis, a woman who is a very senior partner in the antitrust group, and worked very closely with her. And she became a mentor of mine, she was very instrumental to me getting into Northwestern, which is where I went to law school. And I'm very glad I went to Northwestern because it's a law school that focuses on more of a collegial environment than a lot of the very cutthroat, law schools that pit students against each other, which is something I wasn't interested in, since I had a work experience and had been out in the real world for quite a number of years before going to school. I really wanted to go there to learn, to have access to the professors and to be in an environment that really encourages learning more than, this hyper competitive environment. So that's just a short, introduction into my background. I would say it's amazing the number of resources that are available to you all now that were not available when I was studying. I went on to the Northwestern Law School website the other day, and not only do they have obviously international classes available, in addition to, they have now an international moot court competition that you can participate when you're in law school. They have international study abroad programs that you can partake in when you're in law school. I know that one of the things that was available when I was in law school that I actually didn't participate in, and may now in the current situation be on hold, but there are even programs available to study abroad with some of the Supreme Court justices. I mean, there are so many things you can do while you're in law school to get international experiences that are so exciting that you can partake in to prepare you for an international career. They also have international international writing competitions. They have international international clerkships and different international programs that you can participate in while you're in school throughout the year. We have a very strong international LLM participation at Northwestern as well. And those students bring their experience to the law school to enrich the student body of regular JDs with their knowledge, because most of them have already practiced as well. So they bring their experience of, practicing lawyers to the student body to, enrich the JDs with whom they're taking classes. They have, I think, a talent competition with the LLMs that participate in that also. And then, of course, there are internships you can get during the summer that have international flavor to them that were not necessarily available when I was in law school as well. I just did a quick search this morning, and there's a website called pjsd.org that gives a whole list of different types of international organizations that you can work for after law school, depending on your interest area. In addition to the Court of International Trade, the ICC, which is the International Chamber of Commerce, if you're interested in arbitration. And those are things depending on the area of interest that you could pursue. Obviously, of course, if you're in DC, there are a lot of more sort of political oriented areas that you could get into in terms of lobbying, anti-dumping, issue-specific international efforts. And if you're in New York, much more business-focused international work. And then it's easier if you're on the West Coast to get involved with more Asia-oriented because of the time zone international work. But what I would encourage you to do, if this is something that you're interested in, is to focus on your own network and take a look at who might have international connections within your own network, because you'd be very surprised. And that's the first thing I did when I was looking at moving to Paris. I was actually already working at a big New York law firm that had promised me international work. And in fact, I worked at that firm for 5 years without actually getting much international work when I decided to move to Paris. And the first thing I did was reach out to all of my contacts and say, if you know anyone that I should talk to in Paris, send me their information and I'll reach out to them. And the first week I was in Paris, I was already interviewing. And that was, again, pre-LinkedIn. So, you'd be surprised at the amount of networking you can do just within your own social circle.
Yeah, while I was in law school, I connected with one of our alumni who was running a law firm in Beijing, China, and I really, really wanted to try to go work over there to see if I could see myself there long term. And my family is actually from Thailand, so I'm not Chinese, but I took Mandarin Chinese while I was in college, and I had a very elementary proficiency where I could at least get around, get directions, get cabs, get a hotel and that type of thing. But I definitely didn't have a proficiency that I could work there long term. But I wanted to just try it out and see, what the culture was like, what the corporate culture was like. So she came and spoke at my law school, this alumni, and she was saying that they were interested in hiring an American intern.
Right.
And I walked right up to her after the talk, and I was like, can it be me?
Right.
And, and sometimes you just have to capitalize on those types of opportunities. Just reach out to people that are in your network and give it a shot. And, I spent 3 months in Beijing in my second summer, and it was super eye-opening. I was not only learning, the corporate culture, but also learning Chinese culture. And, the culture in Beijing is like so different than many other Chinese cities even. I got to go visit Shanghai, I got to visit Shenzhen, and even between cities, it was really, really different. And so while the rest of my friends were at, American law firms here in the States and just like learning basically the substance of the law, I was abroad learning more about culture everywhere else. And I think that you should push yourself to take those types of experiences very early in your career, because you may not have that many opportunities later on in your career.
Well, and definitely if you're in law school or you're even in pre-law studies and you have the opportunity to have an internship abroad or to study abroad, now is the time to do it, because especially once people have, families with children, then it becomes a lot harder to take some of those opportunities. Now, one of the things I did when I was in law school, I did not, it's possible that there were those opportunities to study abroad in law school. I don't recall Northwestern having that when I was in law school. I did that, in college, and I did that in high school. I'm pretty sure I would have taken advantage of it had we had it at Northwestern while I was there. But what I did, in fact, because I was in Chicago and we had O'Hare, which was, an amazing airport, is every chance I got, I took little trips to Paris. O'Hare, of course, now it's COVID and it's a weird, environment we're living in, but there were these great, short trips you could take with these little package deals where it was pretty reasonable to go on like a 5-day trip to Paris from Chicago. And every chance I had when we had a break that I could do that, I did it. Obviously that's not the same as working there, but I established a certain, understanding of the city and some contacts there. And then when I decided to actually make the move, when there was both a downturn in the M&A market in New York and a certain, point where I had worked in New York for 5 years, which was 3 years longer than I had planned to work in New York. And I said to myself, if I want international experience, it seems like I'm going to have to make it happen for myself. I had a number of friends in Paris, and someone found me an apartment there. Probably in retrospect, I should have done a little bit more legwork before going there, because it turned out to be a little challenging when I got there. But, I had an apartment. I put my apartment up for sublet. I reached out to everyone I knew and got all the contacts from everyone that I knew in Paris. And I was interviewing the first week I got there. I also joined 2 professional networks there, the Professional Women's Network and France Amérique. And I was just on Zoom with France Amérique this morning. I'm going to be participating in an expert panel for them on Thursday about the current polarization of that's going on in the United States. So that was a contact that I established the first week I got in Paris that remains a professional contact today.
Yes, Gail, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what types of work do you get to do that involves, cross-border work that, because there's certain practice areas I think that lend themselves more to international practice than others. So tell us a little bit about the type of work you do.
Yeah, someone asked the question, what is an international lawyer? And I wanted to say that an international lawyer can be a lot of different things. And for me, the kind of work that I do, for some people, it can be in arbitration, which is, similar to litigation, but you intervene in a private dispute resolution mechanism, which is becoming a lot more popular these days. And it can be very lucrative. What I do is transactional work. I do corporate and technology transactional work. I also have been an in-house lawyer, which means that you work as an internal lawyer in a corporation. And that's an area where it's very feasible to work internationally, because especially in Europe, most in-house lawyers are not members of the bar. And so if you're an American who is moving abroad, sometimes it can be difficult to then become a member of the bar in a particular country. It's quite different, the rules, and you can then be required to take, the bar exam in a country where you may not speak the language. Sometimes in some of these European jurisdictions, they can have quite antiquated rules about even being able to take their bar exam. Like in Paris, it took me 4 months to even be able to sign up to take the Paris bar when I arrived there, because they have a lot of requirements where you have to get things translated by an official translator. It has to be notarized, a lot of very formalistic requirements like that. So I did have 2 in-house positions when I was in Paris, one with a French company, Nexlons, which is an Alcatel spinoff. And I speak French. My French got a lot better when I got to Paris because I worked at Nexlons, and some of the in-house lawyers there asked me to translate contracts, which was not my job. I mean, let's be honest. I'm not a translator. I'm not an engineer in any country. And technical, documents, I don't care if they're English or French. I don't have that vocabulary. So in retrospect, I should have told her that wasn't my job, but I tried. And I learned a lot of vocabulary doing that.
And what types of matters did you see a lot of when you were in-house at the French company?
Well, it's interesting because the general counsel of that company, Patrick Noonan, is American. And so I think he liked the fact that I was trained in the US. The legal training here is quite different than it is in France. And so he actually relied on me for a lot of things that I probably wouldn't do here. I have a fairly substantial antitrust background. So I did do antitrust counseling on executives going to trade associations and telling them, be careful about, how you talk with your competitors and things like that. Of course, contract negotiations, on acquisitions and licensing and things like that. One of the most fun things I got to do was working with an engineer in the group who was head of worldwide intellectual property. We put together a strategy for, excuse me, the company has a very large IP portfolio of patents. And it's a big asset for the company. And we put together a strategy for them to take a more proactive approach to protect their IP against competitors who were infringing on their patent portfolio. And that way, the legal department could be a revenue generating source for the company and not just considered, an admin area, and sometimes considered a negative, a department that always says no, or is always an area where they are a blockage for future activity. But in doing that, we were able to generate revenue for the company. And one of the first things we did was go after an American competitor and signed a $2 million licensing deal because they were infringing on a very important patent. So that was a lot of fun.
In particular for IP, if people are interested in working in intellectual property, one of the things that really surprised me is that intellectual property is really a it means different things in different jurisdictions because there's no like international scheme for all patent, trademark, and copyright law. Like every jurisdiction has its own patent, trademark, and copyright laws. And so every single country will have different laws and systems governing everything. Although there is a World Intellectual Property Organization, which is an arm of the United Nations. And there are opportunities to intern with WIPO while you're in law school. In fact, one of my really good friends did that internship and got to go to Geneva, for an entire semester. And that was amazing. So I do want you to be aware that, yes, intellectual property is one of those practice areas that you could potentially have some chances to work abroad, kind of in a more international capacity. Like, I just didn't really understand once I got into law school that there really is no established body of international law.
No,
right?
That's definitely true. Yeah.
It's just treaties and all these different things, right? So so you kind of have to realize that being an international lawyer may not necessarily mean that you're like advising people from all around the world on all sorts of things.
No, and when we say international lawyer, and you can even be an international lawyer and not necessarily live abroad, and that's what I want people to understand is that you can be a lawyer that works for Coca-Cola in Atlanta, and you work with people all over the world. And then sometimes I belong to a group called the Association of Corporate Counsel, and I'm on the leadership committee for the International Legal Affairs Network. And we have members in Asia, we have members in Europe, we have members in Atlanta, we have members all over. And as in-house counsel for a big company in the United States, you could be working in Atlanta and be responsible for a team that is spread out all over the globe. And I was talking the other day with one of my colleagues from that group who's responsible for international litigation for Fidelity. And he's managing right now because of COVID. It's frustrating for him because he's not allowed to travel, but he's responsible for litigation in Mexico, in South America, in Europe, all out of the United States office. Normally he would be traveling depending on the dollar amount involved, be traveling to supervise the bigger matters that he is in charge of. But right now he's doing it all from his home office and supervising outside counsel who are, directly in charge of those matters. So that can be one example of an international lawyer. If you're interested in human rights, you could be, like George Clooney's wife, an international human rights lawyer, and usually that involves a lot of travel.
Gayle, can you talk a little bit about your second in-house position? What was the type of work that you were working on there?
Yeah, my second in-house position was in a very different industry. I was working for Brinks EMEA in Paris. Now, Brinks is an American company. It's publicly traded. And once you work for an American company that's publicly traded, you have a lot of compliance and corporate governance responsibilities. I was responsible for the European, the EMEA and APAC. So that's Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific legal matters for one of the business divisions. And that I was living in Paris, but I was traveling almost all the time because for Asia Pacific, that was 13 countries. And for Europe, that was 27 countries plus the Middle East and Africa. So I was almost never in Paris for that. It was very interesting in terms of the, working. The Asia part was more interesting, to be honest, because in that business in particular, we were already all built out in Europe. We had already expanded to all of the European countries. And most of what was involved with that was just renegotiating the same form contracts in Europe. But in Asia, we were expanding into new territories. We were looking at negotiating with new strategic partners, and we were looking at new acquisitions. And there were some compliance issues because as an American company, we had a lot of requirements that we had to comply with with the Securities and Exchange Commission, with certain, financial anti-money laundering statutes, because Brinks deals with a lot of quasi-banking requirements, dealing with a lot of cash. With, you see those trucks that go, the armored trucks that go to the banks, and they take a lot of their cash out of the banks. And so in a lot of countries, they're considered a banking entity. So we had a lot of anti-money laundering rules that we had to comply with, and we would have to make our partners in other countries sign on to that too. And sometimes in Asia, that was quite challenging because those are not rules that they've ever had to deal with. And it can be hard when you're the one that has to introduce that into a country that does not have those kinds of rules. And when you're the lawyer in Europe that has to explain to the head office in the United States that the partner in Asia won't sign the contract as it's worded, it can be quite challenging. So sometimes being an international lawyer means being a mediator.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit about your technology transactions work and what industries were you in when you were working in that work?
Yeah, I started technology transactions work actually in New York when I was at Latham. I did a lot of, there I was usually working on a giant M&A deal and maybe doing a small piece of it, which involved either transferring a technology portfolio from one company to another, and I would have to ensure, that the wording in the document was correct to make sure that all of the excuse me, the technology got properly transferred, or making sure that the trademarks, were owned by the company that was buying them, or that type of thing. But then when I was when I moved to Paris, and after I left Brinks, what happened was Brinks got reorganized by an activist investor, and they reorganized the headquarters in a way that meant that my job basically disappeared. They wanted me to no longer work with Asia Pacific out of Paris, and that meant that all the interesting work went away. So that's when I decided to start the company that I have now, and to work as an external legal resource, an external general counsel. And I started working with a lot of technology companies. And so the type of work that I do very often now is I do a lot of work on SaaS contracts, cloud computing, licensing, very complex technology transactions where my clients are offering services to other companies, often in the telecommunications sector. And I have to negotiate those contracts. And so oftentimes I have to work with a group of engineers and a group of lawyers and translate the vision of the engineers into a legal document and make sure that everyone understands what they're getting. So I have to have a certain amount of understanding of what the engineers are creating and what everyone should be getting at the end of the day in terms of legal rights as well. And sometimes it's challenging because you're dealing with people who are used to old-fashioned legal concepts, and you have to introduce them into the new way of doing things. So it can be, like one party thinks they're buying a house, but they're really renting an apartment.
Yeah. So, and when you're working in this space where you're kind of the outside GC, or you're working on these transactions, are you working with the in-house teams and their team of engineers, or what are the best contacts that you reach out to so that they know about you and you can start working with that company?
Well, I reach out to a few different people. If a company has already an in-house legal team, I usually reach out to the General Counsel. If they don't, I reach out to the CEO or the CFO of the company to explain what I do, explain my background, and tell them how I can help them negotiate with customers and clients, and explain the fact that I have both a finance and a legal background and enough of an understanding of the technical concepts that I'm able to help them explain those to their customers.
Fantastic. Do you think that with the pandemic, that more legal employers will be flexible with there are lawyers not going into the office all the time, with working from home and maybe not even living in the US, but working from abroad and supporting US firms?
I do. Yeah, I do. Well, already some of the major law firms have indicated that, they are instituting a flexible arrangement, at least, at least if not all of the time, at least, a certain majority of the time for their employees. And the fact of the matter is that I think it's going to be the clients that are going to drive that. Corporations aren't going to want to see their outside service providers, taking risks that could then, translate into the customers taking a risk as well.
Yeah.
So I've already seen more collaboration from a geographic perspective since I relocated, which is encouraging. The only difficulty I see in the US is that we've still got some rigidity in the bar in terms of, the geographic practice licensing requirements and that type of thing. But I'm hoping that COVID will, lead us to more innovation in that area as well. We've seen a lot of pushback on the bar exam and getting flexibility in that area. And I'm hoping that COVID will lead us to innovation in terms of lawyers having the ability to practice, from anywhere also.
Yeah, on that point, I do want to say, though, I think it's a lot more likely that firms are going to be willing to allow their existing employees who they've already built relationships with, who all the employees have relationships with each other, to work remotely than they are willing to bring in new people who are entirely remote, who they don't have very much of a familiarity with. I think especially at the junior levels, firms are really hesitant to bring in folks because they don't know if they can really provide that really good training remotely, and they're still trying to navigate that and figure that out. So I think that junior hiring has slowed just a little bit because the firms are trying to figure out their financial situation, and they're trying to figure out, how to really give people quality experience remotely.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, law firms have never been extreme, the big risk takers.
Yeah, that's why I'm really nervous to say that they're all going to move towards, remote work, because I think that many of them have had to adapt, absolutely.
Yes.
But I've already, many of my friends who are still in large firms have caught whispers about like, okay, well, as soon as we can all be back in the office, they will be demanding that you all come back to the office. And
so, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've experienced, when I graduated, we got a salary bump before we even graduated but not because they're magnanimous. It was because it was the tech bubble. And if they didn't do that, everyone was going to leave to go to a startup. It wasn't because, they were generous. But we had 2 downturns before I left to go to Paris. And every time there was a downturn, we didn't get a bonus, or people were fired, or, law firms are traditionally extremely risk averse. So it's definitely not the place you go to expect long-term loyalty.
Yeah. What do you wish you had known about your position before you started, or the field in general?
That's a great question. I definitely am a planner, and as I mentioned, went to work at a law firm before I went to law school. So I did pretty intense research before I started, law school, before I decided to be a lawyer. And I did actually, interview lawyers as well. So I would encourage you all to do that also. Now, I will say, before I moved to Paris, I didn't do as much of that in retrospect as I probably should have. I had already lived in France a couple of times, but, I did a lot more research coming back this way than I did going that way. I don't know. That's very odd in retrospect. I probably would have liked to have known how hard it was going to be to get a work visa. It was pretty, I think I'm probably the only person who has ever gotten a student visa as a student at the École de Formation de Barreau, which is the French bar school. And when I went to turn that into when you have a student visa in France, you're allowed to then work 50% of the time in a company. You can get this you can turn it into a work permit, but you only can work, half time. And when I went to go to the department that does that, they said, we've never heard of this school. And I said, you're kidding me. It's the bar school. I mean, how much more official could you get? It's not some weird language school where people go and just take a French language class and you turn that into a work visa. You know what they told me to do? They told me to go sign up for French language classes.
Oh my goodness, just because that's more traditionally what they see.
Yes. And I said, okay, it's so much harder to get into the bar school than it is to go to the Alliance Française and sign up for a French class that I don't even need. And that's what they told me to do. They said, well, they're on our list and the bar school isn't. So I said, okay. So my company paid for me to sign up for this French class that everyone knew I wasn't going to take and I didn't need, so that I could fictitiously be on a list that was approved, because the bar school wasn't on their list, even though I had gotten the visa from the consulate with the bar school. So yeah, anyway, that was strange. Yeah, and the economy in France is challenging. So I guess if you're a very risk averse person and you're thinking of trying to do this type of thing abroad, you may want to do more advanced work than I did. But it depends, especially if you have kids and that type of, economic charge. I was going just having to take care of myself. And so, the downside risk for me wasn't enormous. When I went to France, I put my apartment up for sublet and I gave myself a timeline. And if it didn't work out, I was going to come back to the States.
Yeah. Well, I know we're getting towards the end here, so I'd love to give everybody an opportunity. If they want to just jump on camera and ask their questions, they're welcome to do so. If not, you can continue asking them in the chat box, but feel free to just unmute yourself and ask away if you'd like. What languages do you feel are more in demand in transactional or in international transactional law in today's market?
Oh, German is definitely very in demand. At one point in Paris, I was interviewed for a couple jobs where German was a requirement, and it's hard. German is a very difficult language. So that's not one you can sort of improvise. And, Germans speak excellent English, so they really have us kind of under a barrel. Chinese is in demand too, but the difficulty with Chinese is there are so many dialects. So it's kind of hard to, what would you say about that, Angie, if you're going to try to learn Chinese?
Well, Mandarin is the standardized version of Chinese that's taught everywhere. So I think if you're going to learn Chinese for business language, I would learn Mandarin.
Yeah.
And the writing system is going to be the same universally, even though the way that you say the words is different.
Right.
And so, so I think that the way to go is to learn standardized Mandarin. And then there's also several levels of language proficiency exams that you can take to show that you're proficient, like at a business level in Mandarin. So I think it'll always be a very highly demanded language, Mandarin, just because simply so many people speak it and need to speak it for doing business. So I think that for the most part, China too is a very closed legal market still. And so in order to do business with Chinese law firms, you're going to need to interact with the Chinese law firms directly instead of going through like a conduit. So it's very important that you do know Mandarin. It really makes things a lot smoother, even though many of them will also speak English. I think it always goes a long way to show your colleagues that you're willing to learn their language. I think it was really eye-opening for me when I went to China, because I was working for an international law firm, and my firm had a lot of patent and trademark work that they were doing here in the United States. And so I was hired to support them in doing that. But it was really important for all of my colleagues that they wanted to practice English with me all the time, and
Right.
they wanted me to practice Chinese with them. And so in the mornings, the rule was if you came to talk to me in the morning, I had to speak Chinese, and in the afternoons, they had to speak English. And so they wanted to be able to do that language exchange with me as well. But yeah, the very first day I showed up for work, my boss, sent an email out to the entire group like, hey, our American intern is here. And people kept walking by my desk and they couldn't find me because I didn't look like an American to them.
Ah.
So she hung a giant American flag on my cubicle so that people could find me. And
God.
the entire summer I had this massive American flag on my cubicle because they were like, she's not American, she's Chinese. So it was a really fun experience. But I think, yeah, working abroad, you just learn how to communicate so much better because
Right.
I think it's a humbling experience. When you could be the most articulate person ever here in the States. You could speak English beautifully. You could be the best oral argument. You could write the best briefs, and then you're thrown into a foreign world where you do not speak the language, and all of a sudden your ability to express yourself and communicate with others goes back to elementary school.
Right.
And so I think that it's a very humbling experience. It's something that it involves a lot of humility that you have to learn how to be humble and observe the situation that you're in. I think it's also really important for those of you who are interested in working abroad that once you go into a new situation, spend a lot of time observing before you just dive in like a bull in a china shop and just start trying to change everything. I think it's really important to observe how other cultures do things, because there's plenty of times when I observe things that I was like, oh yeah, that's way more efficient than the way that we do that here in the States, And so I think it's important just to be open-minded and also be comfortable with yourself to know that if you decide to pursue this international route, not a lot of other people in the States will be doing it. I think there's a lot more other countries that are much more comfortable with this idea of going abroad and studying abroad and going to work abroad for a while and then coming back. But the United States, by and large, a lot of my colleagues that were in law school, people want to stay here and work here, and you're going to be walking a different path, and you need to be comfortable with that and not just going along with what everyone else is doing. If you think that ultimately you want to go work abroad.
I will say that when I left my second in-house position and I started the company that I have now, one of my selling points to the companies that I worked with in Paris was that I would be available when everyone went on vacation in August. And I said to them, look, if something goes awry or if something comes up, no worries, I'll be here. I can take care of it. I'll be available, for whatever comes up. And that was kind of a value proposition that I had, that now that I've come back, is not a unique selling point as an American, because everybody doesn't necessarily just appear in the summer. But it was something that definitely, distinguished me when I was in Europe. So there are some aspects to being American in another country that can, put you on the map as well. Sometimes you can feel sort of like a fish out of water.
Definitely. So does anybody else have any questions for Gayle before? Yeah, Carla?
Hi. So in my case, I obtained my JD at the University of Barcelona in Spain. And now I'm actually studying in the US, a JD there. And I'm really interested in corporate law. So I would like to ask, what recommendations do you have for someone like me regarding a job search strategy? Where to, I don't know, some advice that you think it will be useful for someone like me.
You're interested in corporate law, and do you have a preference as to geographic location, or do you want to be on the East Coast or the West Coast, or?
Well, I am actually in Miami.
You're in a great location.
So yeah, so I actually really like it there because it's similar to Spain. So I feel really at home. So
right, and there's a lot going on in Miami.
Yeah, and also the language, it's for me you know, like the thing that you guys were saying about the language, that you don't know how to express yourself and you feel like you are from primary school when you talk to. So I mean, I don't feel that because a lot of people speak Spanish, so I can develop myself better. But
okay, well, I think you have a lot going for you. And do you have any local contacts in Miami at all?
no,
You
nothing.
don't.
Just professors from law school, but like I don't talk to them, or I don't have any.
Oh, well, see, that's your first mistake. You should talk to your professors, because I would start there. I would say that professors, I'm not sure where you're in law school, but in my law school, for example, I know that some of my professors even were affiliated with local law firms. And so they could be a great source of potential contacts, your professors. They may have opportunities to point you to, and they know you. I mean, they should know you. If they don't know you already, make that, change that. Definitely introduce yourself and tell them if you have particular areas of interest, because corporate law is pretty big. You can have different, you could be interested in M&A, or you could be interested in, the kind of stuff I do, which is more technology oriented. Or do you know which area you're interested in?
I really like mergers and acquisitions, and also commercial transactions and international business law. So, but I never get to practice. So that's what I like from books and what I read and articles and seminars,
What, can I ask you what student you are?
Yeah, so in Florida, I'm a 1L right now.
A 1L. Oh, so you're a baby lawyer.
Yeah, but I've been in law school for 4 years in Barcelona.
Okay. Oh, but that's even better. Oh, that's even better. So, if you've already had that much experience, then you, as a 1L, may be really attractive as a potential summer intern.
That's what I'm looking for a summer.
Well, then you have to go talk to your professors.
Okay.
And make them understand that, because I was in a similar position to you as a 1L. I had a lot of work. Well, I didn't have that much law school, but I had a lot of work experience, and I was able to get a summer position with a law firm. And not a lot of 1Ls do that. But because I already had investment banking experience, one of the Chicago firms wanted me to do private placements with their firm. And so you're in a unique position. I would try to find a professor that might have a sort of similar profile of yours, where, they might have a sort of international profile, and see if you can explain to them what you're interested in, and see if they might know of some firms that would want to hire someone like you for a summer position. And if not, if they don't leave their office until they give you the name of someone else who might.
Okay.
I would also definitely reach out to your school's alumni. I mean, start with your alumni. There's always going to be a huge number of your alumni in the immediate geographic area where you're going to school. And so, start reaching out to them first, and then explaining your interests and your passions. And, especially I think for international students too, like, even though you're in the JD program, because you have an international background, I would go seek out the person who does LLM advising,
right?
Because they may be able to connect you with other people who are international students here in the States who have stayed, and they have jobs at those places, and they're always a lot more likely to reach out and help.
Well, there should be someone in your career office who does that specifically.
Yeah.
There is some international that they regulate international students, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, I know we're out of time, but if they have more questions, Gayle, is it okay if they connect with you on LinkedIn?
Sure.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll be sending out an email with the recording of this session so you guys can all watch it and connect with Gayle if you have any more follow-up questions. And it was so nice to see you all today. If you're interested, on Thursday, we have another meetup about trends in legal recruiting. We have one of the managing directors of a premier recruiting firm coming to talk about what he's seen as trends during COVID-19. What are the hot practice areas? What are the practice areas that are slowing down? And he's going to talk to you guys and give you some advice for those of you who are entering law school imminently or in law school now to try to find jobs. So thank you so much, Gayle, for your time today. I really appreciate you for sharing your experiences with us.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Bye, everyone.